Ever stop to think about the invisible rules that run your entire workday? You know, who's actually in charge, who's responsible when something goes wrong, and what rights you truly have? Well, it all boils down to this huge legal idea called agency. In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and make all those invisible rules crystal clear, one step at a time.
So let's just jump right in with a situation you've definitely been a part of. You order some food, right? The delivery driver, maybe they're rushing to get it to you while it's still hot, and they get into a little fender bender. Who's on the hook for that? The driver? The restaurant? Could it somehow be you? This is exactly the kind of mess that workplace law is built to sort out. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll know the answer.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to lay the foundation and talk about the agency relationship itself. Then, we'll meet the players and figure out the rules of the game. After that, we'll get into the serious stuff and look at liability, the stakes. And finally, we'll talk about the legal shield that's there to protect you at work. So, let's do this. Okay, let's dive right in. The thing is, at the very heart of almost every single job out there, from a CEO striking a billion-dollar deal to a barista handing you a latte, is this core legal concept called agency. It's basically the engine that makes the entire modern workplace run. So what in the world is it? Well, agency is just a relationship where one person, we'll call them the principal, gives another person, the agent, the power to act for them. A super simple way to think about it is like a movie director, that's the principal, who gives an actor, the agent, the authority to perform a role, all under their direction and control. The director's the boss, and the actor acts on their behalf. See? Simple. And, creating this relationship is surprisingly easy. You don't always need some massive 50-page contract. Really, it just boils down to these three things. First, you need an agreement. Both sides have to consent. Second, the agent has to be acting on behalf of the principal. And third, the agent has to be subject to the principal's control. If you can check those three boxes, then boom, you've officially got an agency relationship. Okay, so we know what an agency relationship is, but here's the catch. Not all agents are created equal. The next huge question you have to ask is, what kind of agent are we dealing with here? And this brings us to one of the biggest distinctions in the entire working world. Are you an employee or are you an independent contractor? The deciding factor between being an employee and a contractor? It pretty much comes down to one single word: control. The more control the boss has over how the work actually gets done, the more likely that person is an employee. Just think about it for a second. Are you paid a salary? Does your boss provide your tools? Are you closely supervised? Yeah, you're probably an employee. But if you're paid by the project, use your own gear, and nobody's looking over your shoulder, that sounds a whole lot more like an independent contractor. And this difference is a huge deal. It changes everything from your taxes to who gets sued, and it's right at the center of the whole gig economy debate. So we know who's playing, but what are the actual rules of engagement? Well, every single agency relationship has a built-in set of duties and a very specific amount of authority that comes with it. Now, as the agent, which, let's be honest, is what most of us are at our jobs, you have a few core responsibilities. You've got a duty of loyalty, meaning you have to act in your employer's best interest, not your own. You have a duty of obedience, which means following their lawful instructions. A duty of care, that's just doing your job well. And you also have duties to be upfront with information and accountable for any money you handle. These are the basic promises you make when you take the job. But hey, this is not a one-way street. The principal, your boss, has duties to you too. They have to compensate you for your work, obviously, and reimburse you for work-related expenses. They have a duty to cooperate with you so you can actually get your job done. And this one's huge. They have a duty to provide safe working conditions. It's a system built on mutual responsibility. And this brings up a massive question, doesn't it? If you're an agent, what can you actually do that would legally bind your boss? Like, can you go out and sign contracts? Can you make purchases? Well, the answer to all of that depends entirely on the kind of authority you've been given. It helps to think about authority in three different flavors. First, you've got express authority. This is the most obvious kind. Your boss literally tells you, go sign this contract. Easy enough. Next up is implied authority. This is the power you need to do your job that nobody bothers to write down. For instance, a coffee shop manager isn't explicitly told order more coffee beans, but they have the implied authority to do it because otherwise they'd run out. And finally, there's apparent authority. This one is all about how things look to the outside world. Let's say a company fires a sales rep but doesn't tell its clients. If that fired rep makes one last sale, the company is probably still on the hook because to the client, it appeared they still had the authority to do so. We've gone over the players and the rules, so now we have to talk about the stakes. What happens when someone messes up, there's an accident, or a contract gets broken? This is where the idea of liability comes into play.
So, who gets in trouble when things go south? Let's break it into two big buckets. First, for contracts, the boss is usually liable, as long as you are authorized to make the deal. But for torts, which is just a fancy legal word for wrongs or accidents, it's a bit different. Your boss can be held liable for what you did, but, and this is probably the most important thing to remember from this whole section, you are always liable for your own torts. That personal responsibility, it never ever goes away.
So why is your boss often on the hook for your mistakes? It's all because of a legal concept called respondeat superior. I know it's old school Latin, but it just means let the master answer. All it means is that an employer is legally responsible for what their employees do as long as it happens while they're on the job. So remember our pizza driver from the beginning? Because they were an employee doing their job, the pizza place is almost certainly the one on the hook for that accident. All right, now for our final and maybe the most important section of all. Because beyond all the rules of who does what, there's a powerful legal shield designed to protect you, the worker, from being treated unfairly. Let's talk about your fundamental rights. And the cornerstone of that shield is a law called Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. This law makes it flat out illegal for an employer to discriminate against you because of your race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It also says that employers have to make reasonable accommodations for your religious practices, as long as it doesn't cause them some huge problem. Title VII also gives you really important protections against sexual harassment, which in the eyes of the law usually falls into two categories. The first one is called quid pro quo. That's just Latin for this for that. This is when a job benefit, like a promotion, a raise, or even just not getting fired, is tied to some kind of sexual demand. The second type is a hostile work environment. This happens when unwelcome conduct is so severe or so pervasive that it just creates an abusive, intimidating atmosphere. It is absolutely crucial to know that both of these are illegal. And when these rights get violated, the law isn't messing around. It has real teeth. Courts can award compensatory damages to cover stuff like lost wages or medical bills, punitive damages to punish the employer for really bad behavior, and even equitable relief, which means they can force the company to give you your job back or give you that promotion you deserved. So from the basic building blocks of who works for whom, all the way to the powerful federal shield that protects your rights, those invisible rules of the workplace should be a lot more visible now. And that brings us to one last question for you to think about. Knowing what you know now about your authority, about who's liable, and about your rights, what's one thing you're going to look at differently when you walk into work tomorrow?